5 years ago, when I started with the ESD, just before the pandemic, before the nation's reckoning on race relations in the summer of 2020, and just as the Student Success Act became the law, the ESD had already begun its journey to center equity in our work. That year, I met with our staff at nearly every one of our sites, with all 20 of our component school district leadership teams, with families, and with the student leaders at Levi Anderson Learning Center. We were meeting towards developing a vision and a collective call to action for the ESD. This resulted in a 5-year strategic plan that called for us to move our recent equity learning into equity action. The very first strategy in that plan calls for establishing and sustaining agency-wide equity learning teams to support continued learning and action towards improving access and outcomes for historically marginalized students. The next year, in the darkest hours of the pandemic, we established a partnership with the National Equity Project, or NEP. In our first year of this partnership, every month we trained all ESD administrators on NEP's approach to equity work called Liberatory Design. At its core, Liberatory Design provides a framework and a collection of mindsets that help us, as educators, support staff, and leaders, to see, to engage, and to act upon inequalities while increasing access for our students and families furthest from opportunity in our classrooms, in our schools, and communities. In the second year of this partnership with NEP, we established our first handful of equity learning teams, training educators from a variety of ESD programs on that same approach. Of course, most of our time together was spent online as we began emerging from COVID-19 lockdowns to more in-person opportunities. And then in these last 2 years, we've expanded that effort to 19 equity learning teams across the ESD. These teams are actively analyzing disparities in our education programming and testing new improvements. This has been a tumultuous year for education systems across the nation, across Oregon, and of course here at the ESD, with extremely challenging contract negotiations, and all within the context of an education funding shortfall. In many ESDs, including here at Northwest, this has resulted in workforce reductions, program contraction, and strained relations. Within this context, ELT members have stressed that it will only become more challenging to find focused time for this important work. At the same time, the ELTs are brimming with interest and determination to keep the work moving forward and to keep equity as a core value here at the ESD. I hope you enjoy listening to Katie Jones from the Office of Equity and Family Partnership as she shares the important work these teams are leading. We synthesized highly complex work into a couple of brief pages. So if you're interested in learning more or getting involved, I encourage you to reach out to Katie. I know that together we can and we will improve the learning circumstances and outcomes for our students who have been historically marginalized in our region's schools and early learning communities. Thanks so much for continuing to focus on our kiddos who need us the most.
Teams across Northwest Regional Education Service District sharpen listening skills to advance liberatory design work. When a reporter sets out to cover an issue, they may picture the outline of an article, but the best reporting will send them on a twisted path, and the story that emerges could surprise them. Northwest Regional ESD's 19 equity learning teams work in much the same way. That's because listening skills, and thus an evolving understanding, are core to uncovering both a good story and an authentic equity mission. An equity learning team is a group of educators in a shared setting, for example, at the same location or in the same department, who identify inequities in their context, define a focus, and trial creative solutions. They do so using liberatory design, a framework that encompasses a set of process stances called modes and a set of value stances called mindsets. There is no one right way to use all the mindsets and modes from liberatory design or act as an equity learning team, explains Katie Jones, who facilitates 5 design labs for the 19 teams each year. But there are 3 key things you will see happening in a healthy team: relationship building and trust among team members, an intentionality to co-design with those who are impacted, not for those who are impacted, and the use of data, both qualitative and quantitative, to determine focus areas and changes. The framework emphasizes self-awareness, recognition of inherent oppression in our systems, and collaborative relationships with those experiencing inequities. Piper Ryan, who has been on the equity learning team for Cascade and Pacific Academies for 3 years, witnessed an evolutionary arc that started with more passive learning. Last year, we focused on re-engaging staff with equity work. Equity trainings had been feeling stagnant, like we were being talked to. We needed a next step, so we brought liberatory design tools to staff, and they were really receptive. Teams like Piper's employ listening strategies, such as story circles and empathy interviews, to foment relationships and take initial steps towards understanding the human experience in our various systems. This year, Piper's team conducted a number of student empathy interviews to dig deeper into student survey data. There was a perception among staff, even within our equity learning team, that because of our low staff-to-student ratio, we could catch equity issues more often. But according to students, particularly those with marginalized identities, we still didn't have enough support in place. A team of Washington County-based early childhood special educators is focusing on strengthening relationships with Spanish-speaking families after uncovering disparities in a family survey. During 2 story circles, they listened intentionally and heard themes arise, like the tension of fitting in time to build relationships in the already too brief family appointments when working through interpretation, or the challenge of navigating possible stigma associated with certain diagnoses when there's a cultural or language barrier. A Clatsop-based equity learning team also tried out a few different listening strategies with Spanish speakers after noticing a possible over-identification of Spanish-speaking children in their special education programs. To strengthen relationships and home in on needs, a Spanish-speaking language pathologist interviewed families. The team also hosted a story circle and a resource fair. They were surprised to learn how much of a lifeline ECSE services were for families in their rural community. A car ride to metro area appointments can lead to dysregulated children for hours or even days. Katie noticed how much team members embrace the opportunity to interact with and learn from other teams. She sees teams sharing what they are learning during story circles and interviews or seeking new vantage points from which to look at an equity challenge. It feels like I'm witnessing the beginning of something that could have deep impacts, Katie gushes, alluding to one of her favorite books, Impact Networks, create connection, spark collaboration, and catalyze systemic change. I'm really excited to see us strengthen how we work across teams to share resources, data, and ideas. The more ingrained the work becomes in our organizational culture, the better chance we have to create a lasting system-wide impact. Joshua Johnson, who is on the Washington County-based equity learning team, has noticed how the training and convenings have emboldened him and his colleagues. We were hesitant before our first story circle and afraid to mess up, but internal partners on Northwest Regional ESD's Equity and Family Partnerships team pushed us along. Since their first story circle, Johnson's team presented to administrators and supported others to employ story circles as a listening strategy. He's seen his colleagues gain courage to step out as equity leaders and role models to peers. Looking ahead, Katie plans to help equity learning teams build a relationship with Northwest Regional ESD's data team. The data team supports the early learning, K-12 special education, and instructional services departments with data, literacy, and goal setting. Katie believes the team will also be instrumental in helping equity leaders gain a better understanding of their equity challenges through use of qualitative and quantitative data, goal setting, and measuring impact. Equity learning teams will continue to meet next year. The Equity and Family Partnerships team is also developing a self-paced learning series that employees and teams can use to engage in equity work on their own time and in their own spheres.